Hello. I hope you all had wonderful weekends and that you are safe and healthy and doing well throughout this time away. I miss you all a lot. And I hope that the distance learning isn't too terrible. But yeah, with that, we can get started with the lesson. Today, our lesson is on a specific method of poetry analysis. It has to do with all of these pictures, except for this one. This is our listening ear. Remember, when you see it, your job is just to listen. You don't have to worry about doing any writing or anything, but it has to do with all of these other pictures. Any guesses? I'll give you a moment. What do you think this poetry analysis system is? That's right. It's called TWIST. So we are doing TWIST poetry analysis. We're going to be starting a mini unit on poetry that we're going to be focused on for the next couple of weeks. So get excited for that. And today we're going to learn all about this TWIST system, what it means, what it looks like, how we're going to use it. So that is our job today. You can now get started on your do now. Your do now today is to define two vocabulary words that are going to come up in our lesson today. So make sure you thoroughly understand what they mean so that you understand our lesson today. At this point, go ahead, pause the video, use Google, search up the definitions of those two words, type them out in your digital worksheet, come back when you're ready. Pause this video, switch to your digital worksheet. Come back after. All right, you're back. Wonderful. Glad you got the definition of those two words down. We can move on to our next step, which is to talk about your objective. Your objective today is I can demonstrate my new knowledge about the TWIST poetry analysis system by taking notes and participating in a Kahoot. So there will be a Kahoot by the end of the lesson today. So make sure you pay close attention so you can be the star of that Kahoot. I'll give 10 bonus points to the winner of the Kahoot. I just decided. I'll give 10 bonus points on the first Kahoot to whoever is the winner. All right, so our agenda today, we have our do now. We already did that. Check. Next step, we have our video and notes. You're here. You're getting it done. Great job. And finally, we'll have our exit ticket, which is going to be the Kahoot today. All right, so we're ready to dive into our TWIST notes. This is where we're going to do a lot of switching back and forth between the video and the digital worksheet. So make sure you're looking for these listening ears so you know exactly when you're supposed to be focused on the video and when you're supposed to switch over and do something on your digital worksheet. So we can get started on TWIST notes. The first letter in TWIST is T. The first T stands for title. We have to pay close attention to the title when we are reading a poem. So when we see a new poem, first step is to read the title and think about the title. Because the thing about poetry is that the poet has so few words to work with, they're not doing anything for no reason. Every single decision that a poet makes, they make for a very, very specific reason, which is why you can't look at poetry too closely. Everything is purposeful in a poem. And the title has a huge amount of purpose behind it. So when we see the title, it's not there for no reason. We should ask ourselves, what does this title mean? Why did this poet choose this title in particular? And based on the title, are there any predictions that we can make about what the poem is going to focus on? All right, so I'm going to switch to my next slide. When I do that, you're going to be able to switch to your digital worksheet to actually take notes on the title. My next slide is going to have exactly what your notes should look like, so you can switch back and forth between that page and between that page of the video and your digital worksheet to figure out exactly what your notes should look like. But on my next page, we're going to pause the video, switch to your digital worksheet, and take those notes. All right, now pause the video, switch to your digital worksheet, get these notes down. And you are back, so we can move on to our next letter in TWIST, which is, of course, a W. The W in TWIST stands for what is it about? Now that we've read our title, we need to figure out what this poem is actually about. So in this section, we're paraphrasing the entire poem line by line or stanza by stanza. Stanza is one of those vocabulary words from your do now. That's like a paragraph of a poem. Paraphrase, the other vocabulary word from your do now. That's when we're putting it into our own words. So we're going to look through the poem. We might do it line by line. We might do it stanza by stanza, depending on the poem. The poem is only like 8 lines. We're definitely going to do it line by line. But if it's like 3 pages long, we're going to do it stanza by stanza. And for each stanza or for each line, we're putting into our own words what the poet is talking about. this is a good time to define any words you do not know. So the great thing about distance learning is that we're always doing this work on computers. So it's really easy. If you see a word in a poem that's unfamiliar to you, you can just stop, search it up on Google, come back, write the definition in your notes. This is a great time to do that work during the W in Twist. So over here, I have an example of what this might look like. If a poem said, I was angry with my friend, I told my wrath did end. And a way of paraphrasing that, putting it into our own words, might be, I told a friend I was angry with them, and then I wasn't angry anymore. All right, on my next slide, just like I did for the T, I'm gonna have the notes for the W. You can pause the video here, go back to your digital worksheet, get these notes down. All right, you're back. That means we can move on to the I in our twist. I think that twist, it sort of builds up as we go and it gets more and more complex. The title, that part was pretty easy. The what is it about? Again, pretty straightforward. We're just figuring out what the poet's talking about. Here's where it starts to get a little bit more complex when we talk about imagery. Imagery is big in poems because remember, like I said, everything in a poem has purpose behind it. So that means that authors have a tendency to use a lot of imagery because imagery is when you're describing in detail how something looks, smells, sounds, or feels. And because everything in a poem is purposeful, a lot of things are going to be described in a lot of detail. Poets tend to use a lot of imagery. And when we see a poet using imagery, we usually know that the thing that they're describing is important to them, to the speaker, to the poem as a whole. Usually when we see a poet using imagery, we know that the thing they're describing is important. So in this imagery section, we're asking ourselves, where do you notice the author describing how something looks, smells, sounds, or feels in detail? Then we're asking ourselves, what makes that thing important to the author? All right, on my next slide, I'm gonna have our notes for imagery. When I get switched to my next slide, you can pause the video, switch to your digital worksheet, get those notes down. All right, pause here. Okay, you're back. Like I said, this twist thing gets harder and harder as we go. So our next step is the most challenging one yet, but I know you guys can get it. Our next step is style. So when we're talking about style, we're kind of talking about three main questions that we're asking ourselves. We're talking about figurative language, structure, and sentence structure. So first we're asking ourselves, does the author use figurative language? We've talked about this before, but as a quick reminder, figurative language is similes and metaphors. Anytime the author is using language in a really creative and interesting way, using words to mean things different from what we would usually expect them to mean. So typically that looks like a simile or a metaphor where an author is comparing something to something else. My father was as tall as an oak tree. That's a simile. The ocean was fierce as a lion. That's a simile. Things like that. The second question we're asking ourselves in style is, what do you notice about how the poem is structured? Because in poems, it's not like a short story where they're structured basically the same way, how the words are on the page. In poems, the poet makes a lot of decisions about where to put the line breaks, where to put the breaks in the stanzas, how long to make each line. And the rules of punctuation, things like commas, periods, question marks, those don't apply as much in poems. Poets can get creative with those. So we notice, where are they actually putting those periods? Did they use periods at all? Those are things that we notice about how the poem is structured. And lastly, we can ask ourselves, what is the author's sentence structure like? This is where we're thinking, do they have really short sentences? Do they have super long sentences? Did they use short sentences for most of the poem, but then in one section they went into this like long, flowy, flowery sentence? Or did they even structure their poem in sentences at all? Some poets won't use periods. So those are the three questions we're asking ourselves for style. And you may not answer each of these questions every time you do twist analysis. For the style section, you can kind of just pick one of these, whichever one stands out the most to you. Like if you see the author using a lot of figurative language, you definitely want to talk about that in your style section. If you think the structure of the poem is like really weird and unique, you definitely want to talk about that in your style section. And if the sentence structure is really jumping out at you, you want to talk about that one. You don't necessarily need to talk about all three because not all poets are doing like really interesting work with all three of these things. You can kind of just pick one or two, whichever ones stand out to you the most. Okay, on our next page, I'm gonna have all of our notes broken down for style. So on that page here, you can pause the video and take those style notes down on your digital worksheet. All right, you are back. That means we are ready to move on to the second to last ladder of twist. This is tone. Okay, tone. We've talked about tone before, and when we've talked about tone before, we've relied a lot on word choice. And tone does have a lot to do with word choice, but that's not the definition of tone. Tone is the attitude that the speaker has towards their subject. I'm going to repeat that because it's really important. The tone is the attitude that the speaker has towards their subject. And that is usually shown through word choice in the poem. So when we're trying to figure out that tone, the attitude of the speaker towards their subject, we want to look at what words in the poem help to convey that attitude. So that's when, whenever you're looking at tone, I usually tell you to look through the story and figure out what words really stand out to you. Those words are words that are going to help you figure out the speaker's attitude. And then based on the words, on those words, what do you think the author's tone is in the poem? Anytime you're analyzing for tone, I'm going to give you a list of tone words. There are a lot of really great high school words that you can use to describe tone. I don't really want to hear things like sad, happy, mad. Those are really words we should put in the graveyard, not use anymore. Where at high school, I want to hear complicated, high-level, high school level words. So whenever you're describing tone, I want you to use that list of tone words that I'm always going to give you. Okay, that is tone. On the next page, you're going to have your notes, just like you've had for every one of these. Pause the video, get those notes down on your digital worksheet, come back when you're done. We'll hit our last letter of twist. All right, we've arrived at our final letter of twist. This is theme. In theme, this should be super familiar one for you because I know you've talked about it in every year of school since 3rd grade probably, so you should know what theme is, hopefully. The theme, like we've talked about all year, is the lesson that the author wants us to learn from the text. So when we're trying to figure out the theme, we ask ourselves, what is the topic of the poem? That's that one word, big idea. We've been over this a bunch of times. Then what does the poet want you to learn about that topic? So the topic is death. We would ask ourselves, what does the poet want us to learn about death? And maybe the answer to that is they want us to learn that even when someone dies, they're still with us in our hearts. That would be an example of a theme. Another a question to ask yourself about theme is what life lesson is there for all of us in the poem? All right, that's theme, should be familiar. On the next slide, you're gonna see your notes. You can pause the video, go to your digital worksheet, get all of your theme notes down. All right, great. Thank you for hanging in there during our twist notes. We're done with your video and notes for the day. We're moving on to the last thing on our agenda, which is the exit ticket. There is a Kahoot linked in your digital worksheet. You're gonna go back to your digital worksheet, click that link and complete that Kahoot, then you'll be done for the day. Make sure you use your real name. It drives me crazy when I look at the results of these Kahoots and I see people have used weird nicknames and I have no idea who they are. Because you put the work in, but you can't get the credit for the grade because I don't know who you are. So please use your real name or something that I'll know is you. There are some of you who use alternative names that you've used the same one all year. I know that's you. You can keep using that one, but don't get crazy creative with it right now. I won't know who you are. All right, if you have any questions or concerns about this lesson, please feel free to call me or text me. My number is at the top of the digital worksheet. Tomorrow, we're going to start actually reading poems and putting this twist analysis into practice. I'm really excited. I will talk to you tomorrow. Bye.